The gym for me was a unlucky accident. I fractured my shoulder mountain biking.
Yeah.
Not a big, enough where I just had to have my arm in a sling.
Okay.
But at 15 years old at school, people point or just, it's not a good time. So I was eager to get back to being able to mountain bike, and I was doing all these cool jumps and pretty rad kind of air. Nothing that I do now, but that kind of pays into that no fear that younger people have.
Yeah.
Like, what could go wrong? Just let me hit this jump. So I remember this doctor saying to me, well, you should lift weights, get some dumbbells to kind of build up your strength. And I had my dad get this old, the old Sandfield York dumbbells, and had the little garage gym. And that's when I got my first muscle magazine, because I didn't know what to do. There was where do you find out this information?
Right.
And I remember in the supermarket,
in
they've got all the fitness magazines, and they had Flex magazine. And so I got that. And flicking through, and I've told Jay this a few times as well, Jay Cutler, found him. He's 10 years older than me. So just like older guy, he was like 24 in the magazines doing this huge leg and chest workout. And I was like, that's what I want to do. He's me in however many years.
Right.
So I would.
You kind of look like him a little bit.
I believed I could because I didn't know any different.
Right.
Well, if he lifts weights and I do that, I'll do the same thing. So for a couple of years, let me go back. I got my arm out the sling, got back on the bike, and it just didn't interest me. I loved lifting weights because I felt I had control over it.
Okay.
And it was this new world that I'm like a sponge. I want to understand. I'll ask so many questions.
Right.
The most crazy, minute question to understand something that in the bigger picture is like, why do you need to know that? I'll tell you one story as well. I wrote into a magazine.
It catered more to your boffin nature.
I digress a lot because that's how my brain works. So pull me back in as when you need to.
No.
I would write into this bodybuilding magazine, and it was a question about nutrition. A couple of years later. And my question was, when cooking sweet potatoes and weighing them out to get the nutritional content, should I remove the skin first, or if I cook it with the skin, which is extra fiber, if I eat that, is it going to change the carbohydrate content, the glycogen going into my muscles? And I remember the writer, forget his name, but he picked out that letter and wrote about it in his magazine.
Right.
Like, who's this kid just asking questions that I've never even thought about? Because that's how far I would go I want to understand everything so I know how it works. 17.
17?
Maybe.
Okay, so you were really eager to learn.
So I made most of my changes from 16 to 18. I probably did 80% of that work. And that was because after the Flex magazine, I didn't know anything. I'd go running around our park for an hour, then I'd come back and try and lift weights for 2 hours. And I remember reading that you've got to, maximize your protein intake. And I had heard about creatine. So, one of the first slip ups I did was read somewhere, I don't even think this is correct now, thinking back, but read somewhere that you've got to combine the creatine with the protein.
Right.
It's actually more fast acting sugars. But back then I was mixing creatine with tuna sandwiches.
Oh my gosh.
Because I thought tuna's protein, and that, so it was a steep learning curve.
Right, yeah.
And this also goes back. My mom had seen all these supplements in the cupboard.
Right.
One was creatine.
Yeah.
And I remember her saying you better not be doing steroids. And I was like, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
I haven't done that.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason, but it's not. It's not my reason why I've stayed the way I have. And it's funny because people are like, I thought you'd be bigger. You should be bigger by now.
Yeah. Well, this is a huge part of your story too, and I think that the promise that you made to your mom is a huge, significant part of your journey. Which, I mean, we could talk about that. But what I will say is, it totally makes sense for you to go down a path that caters more to your set of intelligences. You're eager to learn. You want to. You're really into the science. You're really into being able to control the variables that you as many variables as you can, and you felt like mountain biking, you had too many variables you couldn't control. So now you're going down the path that you feel like is more suited for you, right?
It fit my interest. It fit my personality of wanting to. And this only happened after I had done my first competition. I did a competition just because I wanted to see how I could do.
Okay, so how old were you?
I was 21.
21, okay.
And again, I had just got on with this supplement company. Saw them in a magazine, went to meet them in London. They took photos of me that day, and I was in a magazine, and it was mind blowing for me. It was like all happening too quickly.
Yeah.
Found someone that I had seen in a magazine that was similar. His name is Paul Amos.
Yeah.
He was known as the ab guy, probably the first fitness model, in terms of publications that I likened myself to or wanted to emulate. But then after the first competition, which I had won and beat this huge bodybuilder, I kind of stepped back and was focusing on my studies. It was only that I kept looking at the stage competition that I had on my window half a year later that I thought, can I do that again? Can I replicate the same results? And this all goes back to like, why do you care so much about understanding? Because if you can't replicate it, you're just kind of, how do you have control over it?
You know what I think is so interesting? I think it's so interesting that you were able to experience your specific success in a way that people now never will. And I mean, this is with social media and everything, there are so many people to follow.
Sure.
There's not really you can't really point to somebody who you would consider a trailblazer or a pioneer because pretty much everything has been done. But to be able to get into that level of conditioning and that state that you were in when you were 21 in your first competition, it's almost more impressive because you're pining information from magazines and you're, trying to follow specific people and you're trying to reach out to all these places. You don't have like this concentrated flow of content that people have now. You just open up your social media and you can look at information and you can look at people and you can look at whatever. You know what I mean? So that's a unique experience that most people won't ever have.
I think that helped me get a much better understanding of, let's say, the science behind a lot of the nutrition aspects, certainly because the books and the places that I was going to find that wasn't just, an article online. It was, published books from like the 80s and the 90s and, people who at that time who were writing in magazines, who had a lot more credentials than what turned out to be, how I kind of understood magazines to be towards the latter years. So there was much better information going out. My first teacher, if you like, was his name's Bob Campbell. He is a world powerlifting champion who happened to be our window cleaner, our home window cleaner. He would drive around every week. He had this old little sedan with his ladders on top, and he had these two little Yorkies, similar to what Jay's got, his dogs. And he would clean our windows. Okay. And one day out in the garden, I had a men's fitness magazine with Greg Avedon on. Okay. Who is another, inspiration and idol of mine, who we talk, and it's amazing to be able to communicate with these people that I had grown up with. And I remember stood there, he came down from the ladder and I was like, in my really British accent back then, which I've forgotten now, but I was like, Bob, how do I get biceps and like 6-pack abs like this? And he quickly, he saw that I was hungry for it, and he said to my mom, like, bring him down to the gym. There was this old Scouts hut. I mean, like, really crappy, old, bad, but it wasn't far from the home. And he said, bring Rob down. I'll show him the ropes. Right. And I remember day one, we went in. My mom was there dressed like, this housewife mother. Me in probably my mountain bike shorts and a skinny tank top. Right. And I remember my mom looking at me saying, like, are you sure about this? Do you want me to leave you here? And my eyes lit up, and it was just, like this adult, because, I think it all goes back to when you're younger, you want to do things that are above your age bracket. Right. And like, what better thing to do than build your body and strength train and weightlift? So for those 2 years, I was just at school. I'd bike to this gym. I was pretty easily benching 2 plates by the age of 17. Yeah. Not as a flex for like, I was really getting strong, but just, I'm not a big guy. I've got small kind of joints, which lends itself well to, if you're balanced and proportional and conditioned, then on photos or on stage, you look much better. So I kind of used that to my advantage. But if it weren't for Bob, and if it weren't for me constantly asking questions, I probably would never have been introduced to that strength training world, which gave me a really good foundation for understanding what I needed to do to get like that.